First, I want to say welcome. Thank you for coming. We all are doing this because we believe this is an important conversation. It's great to see so many people showing up who also seem to agree that this is an important conversation. My name is Ian Porter. I'm a librarian here on campus. I'm going to be acting as a moderator today for our panel discussion and then the more open discussion that we'll move into today. So I want to first thank for the support across campus for this forum. We got support from Public Safety, from the Center for Cultural and Inclusive Excellence and the Center for Leadership and Service, the Executive Cabinet, the Bias Incident Report Team, and then the library. I want to thank my colleagues in the library for allowing me to undertake this project and for supporting it, especially our library director, Jerry Ventura. Yeah. So this forum was created as a response to, in the fall, a number of people were interacting with petitioners, so folks on campus who are on campus in what are called our free speech zones, which we'll learn a lot more about in this forum. And there was questions about, how do these free speech zones work? There were lots of concerns because of the graphic nature of images on signs or the Islamophobic rhetoric that we saw on the signs. And so we were hearing a lot of concern about this, and there was a lot of questions about, how does this work? Are they just allowed to be there? What is this, how does this all work? So we thought it was really important to have this forum as an opening conversation about how free speech works on campus. So the goal of this forum is really just as an opening conversation in what we hope will be an ongoing conversation after this forum about free speech on campus. And specifically, it's designed to educate all of us about how free speech works, what are the laws and regulations that govern speech on campus, particularly the free speech zones, but in other ways as well. But also much more beyond just knowing basic facts and knowledge of the law, which is important, is to start having a conversation that builds a culture of equity, inclusion, diversity, excellence, academic rigor on campus. So what does that mean? How do we do that? And as we move into the coming year, we are seeing, obviously with the new administration, with the new Trump administration, we're seeing a lot of actions in speech that are going to raise a lot of questions about free speech on campus. They're going to create opportunities for speech, certainly, and understanding how that should be navigated on campus. So we want to be proactive with that and to start establishing norms, a shared culture, what it means to speak freely, to speak with passion, but also to speak with respect, potentially civility. How do we negotiate all of these different norms for speech? And so this is, again, just an opening of this conversation, and we hope that you all will join us and continue this conversation afterward. And we are looking at any number of ways to do that, which we'll talk about a bit later. Free speech is a complex issue that deserves our time and consideration, and anyone who claims that it's a simple issue, that it's simply free speech, and anyone's just allowed to say whatever they want, and that's the end of the conversation, doesn't appreciate necessarily the material and historical conditions that and the context within which speech happens. So I want to invite us to start this conversation with a sense that free speech is a complex issue, and it's much more than a set of laws, First Amendment. It's about how we're going to decide to, belong together on this campus, how we're going to work together. So we're going to dive into these now with some, again, we're going to start with understanding some of the basics of speech on campus, and then open into a bigger conversation, first with our panelists, and then with the larger group that's joined us. So again, thank you for coming. I want to start by thanking our panelists for being on the panel and introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to just say a little bit about their role on campus in terms of, establishing a culture of excellence, of equity, diversity, inclusion, but also free speech and what their role is on campus. So first, thank you to Edwina Fui, for the director of the Center for Cultural and Inclusive Excellence. Please give her a round of applause. Next is Dr. Shon Meckfessel, who is faculty in English and also a member of the BIRT team. And I should mention is also a scholar of rhetoric and social movements, and so brings an extra layer of expertise on that conversation as well. Thank you, Shon. Next up is Josh Gerstman, the Vice President of Institutional Advancement. And finally, David Menke, thank you for being here, the Director of Public Safety and Emergency Management. Oh, thank you very much. BIRT stands for the Bias Incident Response Team. Excuse me, thank you. Bias Incident Response Team. And I think this is thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Penn. This is an important group on campus who can provide, is a space for students. We'll talk more later about how BIRT can serve students on campus, but it's a place where you can go if you feel like you have been the subject of discrimination or bias in some way. Okay, so I'd like to go down the form. I guess we'll go ahead and start with David and move this way.
Good afternoon. So I know I represent public safety, but I didn't want to start off with just the laws and the rules and regulations around free speech. I really wanted to, start my opening remark with why it's important here on campus and why it's important here in the United States. So if I can quote the late Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in his dissent with Abrams versus United States, he was quoted as saying, "The best test of truth is a free trade in ideas through competition of debate and discussion. This later became known as the marketplace of ideas." Also, in another case, Tinker versus Des Moines, they are quoted as saying, "Students and employees do not shed their rights at the schoolhouse gates." So just because we're on campus doesn't mean that you don't have free speech and First Amendment protection. There are, however, certain narrow restrictions that the Student Conduct Code can be placed to ensure that we have a fair educational process. But other than that, free speech is important to make sure that all ideas are expressed and, being able to be presented. So what is the First Amendment? It's basically in place to make sure that the government doesn't have too much control over the people, that people can say what they want. They can have anything they want to say against the government about anything they want to say within the U.S. and not be controlled by the U.S. government. So really it's the control of the government over the people. So what does that mean to us here on campus? Well, as a state institution funded by the state, we are an extension of that government. So the First Amendment does apply to this, the college, which means that we, as an institution, can only apply so much, which I explained before, which is within the Conduct Code, which is a very narrow restriction. So what is allowed under First Amendment? Because a lot of people do ask us like, "Oh, I don't agree with that opinion out there. I don't like that picture. I don't like what they're saying." So under the First Amendment, it protects all ideas, regardless of how illogical, offensive, immoral, or hateful they are. So just because you don't agree with it, because it goes against your logic, whether it's considered hate speech, right now it's considered protected under the First Amendment. So what is not included under those protections? Anything that incites violence, such as fighting words, harassment, true threats, defamation, and obscenity, to include child pornography, is not protected under the First Amendment. So what is public safety's role on campus? So really, if you go to our webpage, we have the page that shows you the guidelines for free speech on campus. If you're ever interested, go to that page and visit it, and we have the guidelines listed there. I'm going to go over it a little bit, but if you want to know in depth the WACs that we're talking about, it's all listed there. So public safety does maintain a campus visitor log. We do request that visitors come or encourage visitors that come to campus to check in with public safety and also log into our visitor log. From there, we can give them a copy of the WAC and go over guidelines on campus, as well as assign them to one of our 2 free speech areas on campus. And if you don't know, listed in the WAC, there's one over by public safety. Really, it's between building 6 and building 7. And then the plaza down by building 26, 23, and 25. And I know this has been an area of contention, but it really says in the WAC that it's the plaza bounded by 26, 25, and 23. And my understanding of that is that it's up to the building, as long as it does not block exits and egress and ingress into the buildings. So I know a lot of people are like, why are they near my building? I don't want that message near my building, but that is right now where the WAC has our free speech areas. And Washington Administrative Code, which really is the guidelines for our college. Yeah. And why can we have 2 areas where we are asking visitors to have their free speech areas? It's really the time, place, and manner restrictions that we are allowed to impose. And we can talk about that later as we get into the questions. So what are the guidelines for people coming to campus? Really, they can't, the areas that I mentioned that are forbidden by the First Amendment, and also they can't disrupt campus operations. So no noise that's going to disrupt the educational process, blocking students, blocking vehicles on campus, blocking any safety hazards, which would be the egress for the campus. They cannot be inside campus buildings. They can't have sound amplification, and they can't camp overnight. So really, those are the rules that are imposed. There are a couple more if you go into the guidelines on our page, but those are the general ones. And then lastly, public safety just monitors any free speech activities, making sure it's safe for everyone. And I say everyone, if it was written, it'd be bold and underlined, because not just our students, not just our staff, but even the visitors that use our free speech, we have to ensure the safety of everyone. So I think that's it for right now, and then I'll definitely have more if there's more questions at the end.
Great, thank you very much. We'll pass it on to Josh Gerstman.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Josh Gerstman. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement. And I want to take a moment just to say greetings on behalf of Dr. John Mosby, the president of our college, who was able to return back to active service with us recently. And we were just in a meeting with him a short while ago. And I kind of feel that we're in a course right now. David was a student that came exceptionally well prepared. I'm the student that didn't realize there was a second page to the exam. And so bear with me, because as a member of executive cabinet, as somebody who's worked in our community technical college system for about 25 years, I work here because I appreciate the opportunity that our community and technical colleges offer to Western Washington, to Des Moines, to the greater Seattle area. You think about prior to 1961 and our campus coming into existence, higher education was limited. The access to it was limited, probably mostly to the white male affluent population. So when we brought community colleges on board, it was meant to create access to higher education throughout our communities. And that could be here in Des Moines, south of Seattle. It could be down in southwest Washington or southeast Washington and Walla Walla. But it made education accessible. And education doesn't always happen within the context of a classroom with a professor and teaching. It created resources such as a library, where those are open to the community, and it created these campuses. And these places of learning happens through the dialogue that we can share. And so as we have evolved as Highline College, to quote our mission, as a South King County college striving for social justice, Highline College partners with global students as they envision, plan, and achieve their educational and professional goals. those goals aren't just happening in the classroom. They're happening through your engagement on campus and in activities and interactions with our community. And our campus is not just here for people who are matriculated into credit-bearing classes. We, as David said, we're a public institution. We're open to the community. And I would also hope that Highline College isn't just this physical place that we're here, but it's the extension of when we are out and about in the community and we're having our interactions and engagements on behalf of the college as well. So in order to pursue that mission, but also in honoring the First Amendment, which guarantees our right of free speech and peaceful gathering, and any concerns or grievances we may have against the government or in life in general, we want this to be a place of learning. We want it to be a place of exchanging of ideas, discourse, and dialogue. Well, sometimes those discussions are not going to be comfortable, as David mentioned. So we as Highline College want to create an environment where our students and our community members feel safe and welcome, but we also want to know that we are going to be challenged when we're here. You could be challenged in the classroom, you could be challenged walking across campus, and we have a responsibility to help both prepare you for that and support you in that as our students or members of our campus community. And we also want to honor our duty to our governmental duties and the greater community at large. So that's why we have resources such as the people here assembled, whether it's working in partnership with public safety, whether it's monitoring what comes out of the BIRT and hearing what's happening with organized activities of students. But as executive leaders of the college, we are listening, we are active. Hopefully this isn't the first time you've seen us out and about and part of campus activities. We're happy to be here. And it is a big part of our job is to know what's happening both on this campus with students, with faculty and staff, but also in the community as a whole. And so that we make that part of the work that we do. We bring that into the context of the meetings that we have and understanding as other people plan. The one thing that we're not going to do is we're not going to be the ones, our job isn't to do these types of activities for you. We're creating structure, power, and resources so you can do this, so that you can be having these exchanges and activities. So I'm happy to be here as part of the Executive Cabinet. I'm happy to be part of this exchange today and appreciate the time.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shon Meckfessel. I'm wearing like a couple hats here today, and I sort of might shift which one I'm wearing at different times. A couple of those are because of events 8 years ago, last time that Trump was elected as president. During the campaign leading up to that, and then in the short time after that, particularly when campuses, including and especially campuses in our part of the country, were kind of targeted for agitation and disruption. Around that time, Doris Martinez and I formed a group called the Bias Incident Response Team, in keeping with a lot of concerns in the region with other campuses that formed analogous committees, trying to kind of get ahead of the curve, because campuses were immediately sort of hit off guard by some of those things happening and quite underprepared. And so there was a lot of conversations around here about how we might actually get prepared. So that's where BIRT came from, and we're still very active and meet nearly weekly. And then also around the same time, so I'm happy to speak with that hat on, and I'm also currently the co-chair. Also around that time, I was asked by Highline to give a talk at the MLK Week event, and then that expanded into a newspaper article and a series of talks I gave at other peer campuses in the region, and some churches and stuff too, about the way that free speech claims were being kind of weaponized and abused. And I come at this with a bit of a kind of a critical hat as a scholar, because I think one of the things that I did in that talk, and one of the things that I've kind of studied, is the way that free speech claims get used and get applied, including in the courts, including legally, has been abused at times. Not everything that people call not everything that people say is protected speech. But we do hear people increasingly sort of claiming that, and it's hard because the complexity that my colleagues have already brought up. It's kind of hard to pinpoint when that's being abused, but there's definitely a lot of times recently that it has been, and I think we'll probably be seeing more of that. There's a lot of gray areas about it, even sort of among the well-intentioned, in its legal precedent, the way that it's been interpreted, the way that it's been applied. And so, you know, it's kind of, as Ian was highlighting in kind of the introduction, it's tricky. And people usually invoke it like it's this like obvious, no two ways about it, black and white concept. But there's in practice, there's a lot of fuzziness around the definition that is goes with resources, goes with kind of social power, and people for that reason have found it, you know, a place that they can kind of take advantage of. So the words that I was thinking of when I was driving here, raise your hand if you are aware of who the NLRB is. It's the National Labor Relations Board, and they're the ultimate government agency for sort of mitigating labor conflicts. And the current head of them, Gwen Wilcox, who's been doing a fantastic job, black woman board member, and has been the acting chair for some time, was just fired last night. And she gave a talk this morning and sort of was reminding people like, well, I'm sorry I'm not going to be there to help you and do everything that we can, but please don't forget that we're just there because of originally your power, your social power. And she said, you know, in terms of the workplace, she basically said directly, you know, as far as workers, people can still kind of, you know, walk out on strike or do, you know, withhold the labor power and the wealth that you create as workers, even if the institutions are doing everything they can do, you still have power. And I think that's a good place for us to kind of come back to in difficult times. Highline and a lot of institutions of higher ed are currently and are going to be under a lot of pressure and are limited in things that we can do, but that doesn't mean that we, in our various hats as students, as employees, as members of the community, can't do what we know is right. And I think the productive place for us to be and the productive conversation for us to have is to sort of think about the complexities and the limitations and the resources and promises of institutions, as well as the values that we have, that we, you know, what we know is right, and the complicated way that we can, you know, do what we can with that. But yeah, which makes me very glad for this forum, so thank you.
All right. I'm Edwina, copy-paste what all three of them just said. But no, good afternoon. I do want to say thank you all for being here. This has been an event. I'm also a member of the BIRT team, so speaking of wearing multiple hats, member of the Bias Incident Response Team, director for CCIE, and shout out to our Center for Leadership and Service. I know there's student leaders in the space as well as staff. And then on top of that, being a part of the Multicultural Student Services Directors Council, which helped, as Shon mentioned, to help create BIRT teams across Washington State. And so multiple hats, but really my position, my role, and I'm really thankful for it, is that I directly work with student leaders. And so shout out to all the students in the space today. I know when we think about learning, right, you all are our main audience, but I do want to give a shout out to our staff and faculty, because I know that as you navigate walking across campus, things that you may see or interact, and as we think about, as we see free speech across campus, it may impact you too. So I also want to just say thank you for being here. I'm here. I was also not, shout out to David, because I'm like, I don't know all the legal things around laws and stuff. I'm also here as a learner and figuring out like how do we best support reaffirming students when they do come up to us with questions about this and this, or when they see something that impacts them on the way to class, how do we reaffirm them, either through our own interactions with them or through our programming and organized activities that we host here on campus. So a little bit about what I do as being part of the Center for Culture and Inclusive Excellence. You see a lot of emails from us, right? You see events that come on campus, but our mission and our vision, both within CCIE and CLS, is that we provide spaces for students to express themselves, but also to feel affirmed and celebrated in their identities. I know for me, when I hear, you know, being part of the BIRT team and this program being a response to emails that we've received or reports that we've received, a lot of those impact students' identities and how they navigate through this campus. And so I think about if students are being impacted at that level, right, there's always a responsibility of how does the institution respond to them with care and community and having hard conversations, because as David mentioned, free speech is a way to talk about an expression of like your values, your beliefs, your ideas. And ultimately, educational institutions, right, are supposed to be a place of conversation, even when those ideas don't always align with what you see through your lens in the world. So I would hope that in CCIE and CLS that we provide students those spaces, those workshops, when we invite speakers to come and talk about various different ideas, that is not only an intentional space to talk about different topics that maybe you haven't been exposed to, or maybe like you're just wanting to learn more, or you have some curiosity, or you truly just want to see something from the other perspective, right? Those are like what we hope to do in our programs. And also students, knowing that you have resources. That's really what I want to affirm you today, is that you pay something called SNA, it's part of your tuition. These are things that go to support programs and events and experiences on campus. So I also want you to know that if you're looking for leadership opportunities, like to engage more in topics, there are so many clubs that you can to be a part of, but there's also clubs that you can start if you're like, I don't see this represented, I want to get this started. So I just want to put a plug in for that, like involvement or a way to express yourself. Building 8, 3rd floor, or even on the 2nd floor at the Intercultural Center, come connect with our staff and let us know, like, what do you want to see on campus, or what are we lacking, and what are areas or topics that you want to see more, to learn more about your experience as you're navigating. Don't just come to campus and leave. We want you to stay and get involved. But on top of that, I really just want to give a shout out. I know Malia, we asked her, she was going to be a part of this space. Actually, she is, but she's our student speaker of the caucus and representing student government. Just want to thank you, Malia, for being here. I know we've worked with her in getting some questions from peers and colleagues and other folks on campus, but student government is also a space I want to highlight, that if you're looking to address things that are impacting you as a student, come talk to our ASHC, Associated Students of Highline College, and they can bring that to the council space and the conversation. So that is my role in being a part of the panel today. And also, quick shout out to Ian, y'all. He started the conversation. It literally starts with one email of like, how do we get community together? And I want to thank all of you for showing up, because it really shows that folks care about this and want to learn more. So yeah, back to you, Ian.
Thanks so much, and shout out back to Edwina. We worked on this, and it was really great working with her to help organize this. So, thank you all for your opening statements. I think you established really a great sort of broader view of what it means to create a free speech culture on campus, one that both respects diversity and respects differences of opinion and belief, but also is focused on particularly the broader context and material situations, sort of to what Shon was saying, that do not mean that we have a level playing field, right? So I think starting off with the idea that free speech is, it's a right, and there are laws. Thank you to David for really kind of elaborating in detail a lot about how the laws and the Washington Administrative Code, those WACs, as he was saying, govern how this space can be used. But beyond the sort of basic legal structure, we know that there are folks on campus who are, materially and symbolically in many ways marginalized in society. And so this is where the complexity comes in. And so what I wanted to turn to was sort of first inviting, we've talked about, and Edwina sort of ended by saying, we really want you to know about your resources on campus. So I'm speaking here to the students mostly. And I'm wondering if this is an open question for the panel, and it doesn't mean we have to have all the answers now. I'll ask the question, I want to ask about what kinds of resources, what kinds of things can students do to sort of to exercise their own free speech and assembly rights. And this is not going to be an exhaustive list, And I want to say that we are also, as a librarian, one of the things we like to do is gather information, organize it, and present it in ways that's useful. And so one of the things that I will do after this meeting is to try to take the resources that are talked about in this panel and gather them in ways. We're also recording this, by the way, on video, so you'll be able to watch this video later if you want to remind yourself of anything that you saw, and organize it in a way so that you have access to what we're talking about right now in later, if after this conversation. So just be aware of that. So I'm gonna. Hopefully that was enough time to think about ways that how to respond to that. But I want to open it up to the panel. What are ways that students can exercise their speech and assembly rights on campus? Because we know that while there are certainly rights for the broader public because we are a public institution, students, due to the tuition they pay and their role on campus, have a lot of opportunities to practice their free speech and assembly. So would anyone like to, Edwina, would you like to get us started?
Yeah,
Please
I would
do.
love to get started. I think one of the first things that comes to mind, especially also, many of us have also been previous student leaders on our campuses, and one of the biggest ways that I've seen students practice their rights or their voices through activism, right, and through advocacy or challenging, I can't advise you what exactly to do, but I want to remind students that through clubs, organizations, talking to CLS, CCIE, let's say, for example, you saw something, I just want to give an example. Let's say you saw a sign that says, I hate the color orange because you're wearing it, but then I'm over here, I'm like, I love the color orange, how dare you say that about me? Just to provide some context. If you wanted to provide a program in response that counteracted something that maybe was offensive to you or impacted your learning, you have resources. I just mentioned CCIE, CLS, clubs. Come to us and talk to us about ways of offering a program on campus or an event, because we do a lot of pop-up response programming, especially if it really does impact the way that you're navigating through campus. So I do want to say also as students, you have more opportunities and I would say access, I'll just say that, regarding if you wanted to host something and reserving a space on campus to hold a conversation in response to something. So I do want to just mention that you have access to that resource. Just come talk to us. We're always open to hearing your ideas, or if we don't know it, we'll know someone on campus that we can connect you to, whether it be a faculty member, a department that you can collaborate with. Ask somebody, and until you find the answer that you need, keep asking. That's what I will advise and share as one of the first resources that popped up in my mind.
So I want to make sure students know their rights on campus, and one of those is when you see the visitors in the free speech areas, a lot of questions we get is, why are they here? Why do they have this message? And what are my rights? So one, you have the right to not talk to them at all, not engage them, just ignore them, continue about your day. The First Amendment does not provide them the right to an audience. So we have done everything in our part by allowing them on campus and the use of our free speech areas, but you don't have to provide them an audience. You don't have to provide them any of your time. You can continue about your day. Maybe that will work. Maybe they will move on to a different location because they're not getting the interaction they want. But you can also say, you know what, I don't like this message. This message is wrong. This message is hateful. I want to speak out against this. And you can speak out against it. You can't use violence, but you can sit there and debate with them. You can have an opposite message. You can recruit your fellow students to have an opposite message. As long as there's no violence involved, you have the right to speak out. And you actually have more rights than the visitors that come to campus. You can go, you're not bound to the free speech areas as a student. You're allowed access to the buildings. And, I would recommend if you want to organize something bigger that you do work with public safety so we can ensure everybody is safe while on campus and we can support you. But you do have many rights on campus. You don't just have to let visitors come here and say their piece. You can definitely let them know how you feel, especially, as I mentioned before, if the message is immoral, offensive, hateful, we don't have to stand up for it because it goes against our values as the college. Furthermore, I know we talked about it a little bit, but the college does have guests and visitors, but if you feel like your message isn't being received, maybe ask the college or try to invite your own speakers to come to campus to provide a different perspective. So those are some things you can do as students, and if you want to know more, feel free to talk to any of us, and we can definitely talk to you and coach you on your rights as a student.
There's sort of two parts to this that have come up several times in BIRT, and one is they're related, but they're kind of not the same. One is, we've heard a lot of concern. I think it's probably the motive behind having these current campus conversations about community groups that are coming in, not apparently allied with students that are, have signs and graphics and messages that are, I think, in most of our opinion, against the values that we stand for as a college. And then we have the other related but different topic about encouraging students to make their voice heard, including disagreement with those. One thing, we are obligated to some degree to tolerate groups that come that say things that aren't consistent with our values by the predominant interpretations of the First Amendment, which again, we should pay attention, can sort of shift and stuff. But we actually encourage actively, not just tolerate, but we really want students, and we have resources and a lot of things to help you speak out as students. So that's one important thing to think about, is the difference between having to tolerate people who are playing with in these lines and actually with students who are like encouraging and celebrating and making resources available to make that more, to help you do that. I think one thing that one thing that can be helpful, even if it's difficult to think about with some of these outside groups when they are saying things that are contrary to our school's values and to your own values as a human being, is to sort of think about why they're there, because that might actually suggest some interesting creative ways to respond in an empowered way that allow you to express your values. So for example, we've seen some of these groups that are clearly, I think I would hazard saying Westboro Baptist Church, which set the model for some of this, was basically just a lawsuit factory. And I think sometimes you see groups that are saying stuff to get attacked, and then they sue people very actively under First Amendment law to get money. And I think a lot of the time, to be real, that's at least part of, if not most of, the motive going on. So it's really important to think about how we respond if that's why somebody's there, and especially, maybe they want to do something where they can sue Highline and take the money away from, the good stuff that we do and direct it into their pockets. So that, if I know that's why somebody's here, or if I guess that somebody's here, that's gonna give me a certain approach, not playing into that and not encouraging activity. Another thing is if you suspect that they're actually trying to sort of convince people, then there's ways that we have resources for students to present their own tables and events and everything, and also it's completely within the rules of the school to have a presence and a consistent response when there's somebody else there. And I'm going to leave it up to people's creativity, but if you can do that in a way where they're like, oh, we had the opposite effect and people realize that we're jerks, rather than having the appeal that they hope to, then that can be a way to do what you know is right while staying within the rules, depending. Jennifer and colder brow. But I think that I think it's complicated, and everybody always sort of, it's not everybody, but a lot of the time people rush right into sort of saying like yes or no with free speech, and I think it's really good to think, who's the specific group, what are they specifically, why do I think they're here, have I done some research on them, and that might suggest some productive ways in keeping with our institution, in keeping with your values, to respond to that.
Great, thank you so much. I think that was really helpful. I think since we're on the topic of the public petitioners using free speech on campus, free speech zones on campus, and David mentioned earlier sort of some of the things they're obviously not allowed to do under First Amendment. So I thought it would be useful to be really concrete here, and this also helps us maybe talk about the BIRT team as well. And that is that if students feel harassed or threatened on campus, so obviously what harassment and what a threat is could potentially is obviously fuzzy at times. But I think it's useful to just know, as students, to know your rights. If someone says something to you that you feel is a kind of harassment or threat, what can you do? And so I think that probably goes to David, but anyone on the BIRT team as well can probably respond to that. So thank you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, there are certain things that you cannot do under the First Amendment and under free speech rights. And some of those are things that incite violence or fighting words, as I mentioned, as well as harassing. And a lot of those are directed towards an individual. If you look at the case law under fighting words, it has to be directed towards an individual, not a group, that would cause that person to react in a violent manner, such as saying something within inches of their face. Maybe it's a some type of word towards them, or offensive mannerism that would invoke a violent reaction. So that's a lot of times, and harassment is kind of similar, where you're not really going to harass a group under the law. It's going to be directed towards an individual. And a lot of times we'll get a call at public safety from a passerby saying, hey, I don't feel safe, I got harassed by this group, I want to file for harassment. But when we look at the groups, because we go out there and monitor them, and some we have to monitor a little more than others, but they treat every student the same, more or less. They spit out their message, they have their poster boards, they might try to get their attention, but they don't really treat any individual different than another one. So it's a hard ground to say that they're harassing a certain individual specifically, and that their intent doesn't have any value, because they have their posters and they believe in their beliefs. So they do, under the law, have a value of why they're there. A lot of time harassment has no benefit to anybody, and there's no real rhyme or reason behind it.
And my understanding, again, this is not, I'm an English professor, this isn't like my focus, I'm not a lawyer by any stretch, but I believe also campuses are in a tricky position where we are also not legally obligated to provide, we can, I believe any state institution has the right to regulate the time, space, and manner that groups can have exercise their free speech rights on campuses, and that cannot, campuses have the right to decide what that is in a way that doesn't interfere with their mission as an institution, with our educational mission when it's a campus. This, I think, is one of the areas that has a lot of gray area, because I think some of the messaging that we've seen from campus groups, it might be really hard for students. Students really, we talk about this constantly at Highline. All the research shows it, that students do better if it's their campus, if they belong, right? And I think if something is, and Highline does an extraordinary amount, I think, more than most campuses, about communicating that, recognizing that, trying to implement that in all these different ways. That we have the one recent study, 5th most diverse college campus in the country, and we need to reflect that if we're going to serve our students. Sorry, I sort of froze for a bit. I'm going to come back to that point.
Yeah, so...
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
sorry,
go
I
for it.
dropped it. It was too many things in my mind. So basically, the institution is in a place where we get to, the college has to decide, like, how do we recognize the free speech demands of these people who are often, very eager to sue if they feel like those are being infringed, and at the same time, do that in a way that's not going to interfere with the educational mission of the institution. I think that's actually a point of tension. And if students are feeling like that's not working for them, like they're having trouble being students, you can put pressure on us to do better. And it doesn't mean that's an easy job for us, but it's our job, right? And so I think that's a point of tension a lot of the time. If people are feeling, I will say 8 years ago I had a friend who just walked out of her graduate program, literally walked out in the middle of a class and never came back after 7 years of study at the University of Washington because of stuff that was being said in her classroom. Somebody's not doing their job if that is happening, right? And so thankfully I know of no such incidents at Highline, but I think we should think about those as a way to measure that if somebody is claiming, no, this is just my First Amendment free speech rights or whatever, but it's actually getting to the point where it's interfering with students' abilities to be their best selves as students, that's a problem. And I don't think students should take that on their back. I think that's the responsibility of the institution. And so students, through things like reports to the bias incidents response team, through talking to public safety, should call that to the institution's attention and make us deal with it, because it's our job.
Shon, if you may, I just wanted to add to your time, place, and manner comment. And as an institution, we do have to follow the Supreme Court ruling, which has, they have a test called the Ward test, and basically it's three-pronged. It basically says, are your restrictions content neutral? Your narrow tailoring, meaning there's only so much that we can define for them to do, so we can't put so many restrictions on them that they can't even come here and exercise their free speech, as well as making sure they have alternative methods that are just as much, where they're going to be exposed to just as many students. So we can't say, you know what, this is, you know, impacting too many students, so we're going to put you way down in the west lot where the gravel is because that's where we want you now. The narrow restriction won't allow us to do that. So while we can work with you and we do want to hear your opinions, I think the other alternative, as Ian has been asking, is just what are the student rights and how can they, you know, have that narrative with these groups that are here to ensure they know that this isn't what they want and, you know, expressing their side as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think it's helpful just to maybe, you know, reinforce this idea that there are sort of reactive responses to someone in the free speech zone in the moment. There's a sense of sort of reactivity or a potentially feeling, you know, that you disagree with what someone is saying, and that's sort of a reactive moment. And then there's the much more proactive approach that that everyone is promoting around sort of changing the culture, so such that, you know, if I guess I just give a little context. I think on campus, folks were sort of like, these people are in the free speech zones, and we're not, you know. They're just there, what's going on with this? And there was maybe a sense of a vacuum or not as much of an active discussion about what they were saying or why they were there. And so I think the more proactive culture, a proactive response, that is to say, to build a culture that says, no, this is what we care about on campus, in a way can kind of mute the particular speech of some particular person on campus by creating a much bigger shared culture. And I think, and so I think that's just one thing I wanted to highlight. But I know we're getting close to the end, and I want to respect everyone's time. And I want to thank Malia again for being here. I know that you, as a representative of the students, thank you so much for being here. We're able to gather some questions. We want to start with Malia. I want to potentially open it up, but I know with time we may be running out. So I just want to highlight that we do have these QR codes on the tables, the smaller ones that say scan me. We will continue this conversation, so if we don't get to your question today, I want to make sure that we kind of think about moving forward your question and find ways to engage with that. But Malia, if you wouldn't mind bringing one of the questions that you brought.
Well, hello everyone. I am Malia, and I'm the Speaker of Caucus for the Highline Student Government here. And one of the questions which was asked to me by one of my friends is, what is the difference between hate speech and verbal discrimination? And how can you, as a staff member, approach a student that is affected by one or the other?
That's a great question and a challenging one, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm happy. So I'm happy to extend. So we're talking about the ability to stay. I hadn't confirmed with all the panelists, but I'm happy to extend this for longer. So we have this room booked until 1:30 actually. So for those of you who have to go somewhere else, there will be no disrespect if you have to quietly leave the room. But so coming back to the question, so we'll potentially extend this for a little bit as long as everyone's able to. What is the difference between hate speech and verbal discrimination? Yeah, that's a really interesting, right? So I think, and just maybe to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think this idea of harassment that David was talking about, you know, someone might feel harassed if someone makes a blanket statement about their religion, as we've seen on certain signs on campus. But David made clear that statements about groups of people is not considered harassment. But hate speech is this other term we hear. And so I'm wondering if anyone can help us understand maybe what is hate speech, and how does that relate to something like harassment or verbal discrimination?
So the interesting part about hate speech is there's no defined definition of hate speech under the law. Whereas if you go under hate crime, there's an actual definition. Hate speech doesn't actually have one that's accepted universally. But the one that I would say is that it's any form of expression where the intender speaks to vilify, humiliate, or incite hatred against a group or a class of persons on the basis of their protected race, religion, skin color, identity, ethnicity, disability, or national origin. Where you were talking about, what was the other term you used? Verbal discrimination. I think it depends on who it's being said to, because it could be more towards an individual than a group. I think both of them have very close definitions because, again, it's humiliating somebody, it's treating somebody differently because of their protected class. And I feel like hate speech is, without a definition, almost meets the same definition as well.
Two things. I'll just say I'm not sure. I've heard a lot of objection around the term hate speech because it's not really helpful, because a lot of the time some of the most discriminatory speech hides its hate or whatever. And so if emotion or whatever hate is the measure, it's kind of a hard thing to measure by, as opposed to exclusionary, for example, racist, exclusionary based on religion practices, which is a little easier to measure by. There is, I'm just finding this is on Stanford's site about limits of First Amendment. There was a ruling in 1999 that said that verbal harassment must be of a kind. So I think behind this question is that verbal harassment is not protected speech, right? Hate speech is kind of really like an empty phrase that's not very helpful because you can't act differently based on something being hate speech. However, verbal harassment must be of a kind that, quote, is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, and that so undermines and detracts from the victim's educational experience that the victim students are effectively denied equal access to institutions, resources, and opportunities. So the interesting thing is, this is sort of the measure we were saying before, if something is actually interfering with somebody's ability to be a student, arguably that's not protected speech, and the school is not obligated to protect it. I just want to emphasize, as with the example I brought up from the NLRB this morning, that like the institutions, speak in absolutes, but institutions also kind of move with the wind sometimes. And so I would say, like, in my 8 years since I gave that talk and trying to kind of have these arguments, including with the representatives from the State Attorney General office, it doesn't necessarily, a 1999 ruling doesn't necessarily mean that's how they're thinking of it right now. Or they would say, oh yeah, well, we agree with that, of course, but that's what's happening on your campus. And that's why it might, it's a little more complicated how we make these things happen. But I do think there's a very good case there that if somebody's educational, if the school is not, if something's interfering with the educational mission of the college by not allowing students to be their best selves because of things they're encountering, that the school isn't obligated to protect it. But it's great, it's gray area, and the courts have not necessarily been on our side on it.
Ian, if I could just quickly add, Malia, thank you for bringing that question forward on behalf of classmates. The one thing as an administration that we don't do is we don't make judgment on how you feel and how you're going to receive that information that's out there. So if it's affecting you, we do want to make sure there's resources available to you as a student. We have members of our outstanding counseling staff here. That's a resource that's available on campus. We have the amazing library, which is a place not just to gather, but also to learn. Oftentimes, if we're online, and we see information, we have that ability to again go look it up and have some deeper understanding of it. But if you're walking across campus and you hear it, what do you do with that information? And it may sit with you, it may reside in your head. It's now got free rent in your head, and that may not be a great thing for you. So that's why we want to make sure you have access to the resources, you and your all the students, to make this a place of positive learning and what to do with that information. So I would just say again, because we are on this campus and we have those resources, we want to make sure that students are aware, and we're not going to judge you for being impacted by things you hear. I think if we can facilitate how to process that and how to then also respond. We heard that you as students can also come up with bigger and more creative ways on how to share your views or gather and assemble. So all those resources are at your disposal. We want to make sure that the students here are always aware of that as a student at Highline, you do have those additional rights because you are a student here at Highline.
Great, thank you so much. So, Malia, were there any other questions you'd like to share right now? Yeah, so we'd love to hear more questions. Again, we'll open it up to more folks in a second.
My last question is that we are told right now, from what I'm hearing from you guys, that asking for help from you guys is an option and it's a resource that is suggested to us. But during that help, we are kind of told, we'll work on it, or this is not in our capability. Then how is that a help? And also on top of that, I did wanted to say that there's so much hatefulness from those comments that is portrayed upon the things that are being displayed in the campus. I mean, as a college, can't you at least extend to the point and say that you can't display something so hateful that it kind of motivates students to not go to class and stay there and talk to you guys?
Thank you for bringing that, and thank you for the person who, thank you for the conversations behind that as well. I think it's courageous to bring this up and extremely important. I mean, from my angle, I don't know which hat I'm wearing. I'm kind of wearing 3 hats stacked up on this one. I think that's a really good point. And I mean, I think, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer. I think that should be legally true, what you just said. The concern is that it's not clearly like what the legal authorities are saying. And so in some way, so I'm just gonna say Highline's in a position where we need to serve our students and we need to do, live consistently with our values. And it's also tricky to do that when the authorities that would rule if we're right or wrong in a lawsuit might not agree with those interpretations. I don't think that there's an excuse for that situation, but I think the response is to think about the powers that we do have and to not be okay with it. But I think being real, it's a limitation that institutions are in right now. And recognizing that and thinking strategically how to engage that is a very good question. I don't think it's okay.
I know I've read some stuff with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, surrounding this, and really what they talk about with the hate on campus. One, I can tell you that they want students to fight against it. They tell them the only way to combat hate is to show things that you cherish, and that's directly from them. For us as public safety, I would love to say, yeah, tell them to go away and put away the sign. I wish I could do that, and we are bound by the law. And so really what we look for is another one from the Supreme Court. They love their 3-pronged test. It's called the Miller test, Miller versus United States. And it's really for any obscenity or anything that's offensive. And the way to test it is, one, is it have any type of interest for the average person? So for them, they could argue it does because of their religious supposed message behind it. I say that skeptically, but that's what they claim. 2, is that it's so offensive that it would be offensive to the average person. And then lastly, does it lack any serious literary, artistic, political, religious, or scientific value? So in a court with the Miller test, it wouldn't hold up. If we asked them to go away, we would definitely be liable to a lawsuit. So this is one of those areas where, we want to empower you so that you can let them know that because I have seen students go out there and talk to them, and they were able to convince them to put the sign behind another sign. And, just through their talking, and, maybe it's trying to figure out, one of the students asked, why is it this sign? Why can't you just use this sign? Why does it have to be this one? This one's hateful. This one's offensive. And he told the ones that I just want to start a conversation. But maybe working with them to figure out how to start a conversation, because after that, they put it behind another sign. So even from what I'm seeing, they will listen, and they are willing to talk and have that debate. One other thing that you can't do, which is called the heckler's veto, you can't do anything that blocks their message. So you can't try to block their sign or try to be so loud that they can't relay their message. But you can definitely have that conversation with them, or provide your message of love and the opposite message of their message of hate.
Great, thank you very much. So again, I think we're seeing in this, I think maybe you all can disagree, but I just want to we're seeing the sort of boundaries of what the law says, and then what is the broader culture that we want to establish on campus, and how we do that. And so I think, again, this is where the complexity comes in, because you hear folks who say, that free speech is absolute. I can say whatever I want. But we all know as human beings that decency matters, that respect matters. And so that's the kind of thing I think we're all trying to ideally promote, is something that allows us to lean out of this sort of abstract, I think basically this abstract idea of free speech, and it is important, right? It is an ideal. But ultimately, when we stay in the abstract, we miss potentially the human consequences. And so being able to really create a culture where we show that decency is one thing that I think we're all trying to talk about and understand. How do we do that when we see indecent messages on campus like what you're describing, Malia? I want to open the conversation up to anyone else who would like to ask a question. Yeah.
David, you referred to the things that are permissible under the First Amendment and the things that are not protected. And one of the things you listed was a true threat. Can you say what constitutes a true threat?
It's usually anything that's going to invoke violence right then and there. And I mentioned it under fighting words, where if it's directed towards an individual and it will result in immediate violence. So I know one of the Supreme Court cases is under whether you can scream fire in a theater. And under that, they said, maybe. And I'll explain. But maybe, because if you truly believe there's a fire and there isn't, and you scream out fire, then yeah, you can scream out fire. And that would result in chaos and everything else. But if your only means is to cause chaos and somebody gets hurt, then yes, you could be found liable, and that could be deemed a true threat based off your words, because people are going to react off of your words, and now you're screaming something that's going to cause panic and chaos. So a lot of it is really, what is the reaction to your words for the truth, the true threat? And I think I even wrote that down in my definitions. Let me see if it's on my definitions page. Statements where the speaker means to communicate a serious expression of an intent to commit an act of unlawful violence to a particular individual or group of individuals. But it has to result in an action right then and there. You can't be like, I hate this group of people, I hope they all, whatever happens to them. That's not considered a true threat. But if you're like, let's go do this right now to this group, grab your, whatever, and people start acting on your expression, then that could be deemed a true threat. Yeah, go ahead.
So would a statement like, "You'll be dead this month" be a true threat?
Usually they want to know the means behind it, so it'd be hard. Is there an action that's going with it? I don't know. So I think I would have to have more information.
One of the, I'm always coming back to that sort of gray zone about it, and I think pushing when you feel like claims aren't going to be recognized is like a good thing to do, even if it's not easy. In, I think also the late 90s, there was a Supreme Court case from Oregon called, I think, People's Right to Life versus Planned Parenthood, and there was a group that was putting up flyers on poles in Portland, content warning, nasty stuff we're talking about here. There was like an anti-abortion rights group putting up flyers in Portland, and what they did was they listed, it looked like an Old West like wanted poster or whatever, and it had a list of abortion providers. Maybe I do need the second water. It had a list of abortion providers, and the first half of the list was crossed out because it had been doctors who'd been assassinated, who'd been killed. And then it had names of other abortion providers in the area beneath that that had not yet been crossed out. So the thing is, in like legal interpretation, it has to be up to some judge to be like, yeah, I mean, that's obviously a death threat. Or like, you know, it's just some names and it looks like the Old West and, you know, make of it what you will. The problem is it comes down to like people who are going to decide that or not. At the time in the late 90s, yes, they decided that's not protected speech, that's a death threat to these specific people and also people in the industry doing that thing. So the groups putting up those flyers were found guilty and they're like, that's a death threat, that's not protected speech. And sometimes, here's the key, sometimes talking isn't speech, it's an act. And so an act, a threat, a death threat, is an illegal act. And so that, at that time, that's how they lost the case. The key is, I think, that in the end comes down to some particular judges who are making that call. And so that's the thing to look for, you know. But this is one of these ambiguities. Like that was a decision that was made, and I have to say, like that took a lot of context. Like I'm sorry, he walked out. No, there. Depending on the context of when somebody said that to you, there is a legal precedent where somebody's like, well, yeah, no, obviously that's a death threat. Depending on the context. And that court case, they were looking at a context. Like you have to know the context that those doctors on the first half of the list were killed to understand that it's a death threat. But the court said, well, yeah, context matters. But again, I'm just going to emphasize the same, like the courts might say something different now because they're not necessarily always saying the same thing.
I want to come back to Malia had a question, but I just want to reiterate, if you were to hear that, if that kind of statement, that sounds to me like a great is the wrong word, an important moment to potentially contact the bias incident response team, to contact public safety, you know, to let them know. We want to know about these things. And you know, whether or not it will end up in a court and a judge will say one thing or another is way down the road to, please, we want to know about these things because again, as a campus, we can respond in lawful ways that, you know, that can counteract that kind of speech. So Malia, I know you had another question.
This question isn't by a student, but it's more something that I was wondering. So considering everything that's going on politically, I mean, from what I'm, like my viewpoint, I'm kind of expecting racism to show up, right? So right now in our campus, we're seeing hate towards people with Islamic beliefs, right? So my question is, the next time if we see a racist poster or someone that's, you know, expressing racism to our students, would you judge it the same way that you judge someone who's discriminating with someone's religion?
Just to confirm, you're asking like the types of posters you see in the content of like a racist poster and a religious offensive poster. Like you're just asking us like how to respond to.
Yeah, how would you respond? Because you guys have mentioned that if the hate or the speech is directed to a group, then it's protected by law, right? But if that speech or the thing that they're trying to express is towards
I do want to say, because I know when we were talking about the categories, like they would be considered still as like treated as, I don't want to say same because experiences are all different, right, depending on how it's being interpreted. But I would see, I'm looking at it from a lens of when you read that, if it does impact you in that level. I'm thinking of students. Sorry, y'all know my perspective is how you're navigating through. How would you take care of yourself in response to that? So you could either, like as what was mentioned, engage in conversation to see like what is the motive behind, right? They're wanting to start dialogue in the posters that are being out there. So I think for you, it's making a decision like, do I want to respond in like I want to engage in conversation with you? 2, is this going to impact my mental health? So I'm just going to walk away and just get to where I want to go. 3, like organizing y'all is also another option, like counter protests. I want you to think about that. Like if there is a verbal thing that was said to you that impacted your learning, do you want to respond? How do you want to respond? I guess that's my question is, how would you as an individual, or is that if it's being part of a larger community in response to whether if it was a racist poster versus like something coming for religious or even other identities, right? There's many different ways that folks could put things and phrases and statements to practice their free speech on a poster. So I think I'm thinking about the layers about, are you asking us how do we respond as a college? Okay, sorry, Malia. I was thinking of like individual, like I thought like you're thinking like through your lens as a student, how do you respond? But I feel, I mean, I don't know, I might tap into David. I feel like it'd be the same ways that it's being treated, right? Like similar across all different ways.
Yeah, and it really depends on how these posters are being displayed in the past. This is why I have to make sure our staff stay the same all the time, whether it's somebody's apartment posting or math tutoring, that we pull it down without a stamp. Because then I can always react to it and say, we always take down a poster without a stamp. So let's say it is a racist poster or against a religion, it's the same standard that we're going to pull down any poster that hasn't been approved by CLS and doesn't have the stamp. Now, in the sense of the free speech areas, it's going to be that Miller test that I explained earlier for obscenity or offensive. And even though it might be racist or against a religion, I have to determine if it's going to pass that test or not for me to decide if they can take it down. And so there hasn't been a lot of precedence of, winning in court against the Miller test. So it's that narrow defined definition under it that we have to maintain. So for us, it's really just making sure that people interact safely with each other, because we know that, a lot of times one thing we will do different is that we know it's going to have a reaction. We'll make sure somebody's out there. Where if it's just, we have different groups that might be handing out Bibles, we're not necessarily going to be out there watching the whole time. We might check in on them, but if they have a poster that we know is going to create a reaction, then we'll probably have an officer or myself either off in the distance watching or nearby. So that is one thing we'll do different depending on the message.
Sorry, just to add on also about the posters, invite collective responsibility, because sometimes posters do go up in unauthorized places, so staff, faculty, students. If you see something and you read it and it's like, oh, that sounds a little weird or feels a little weird, feel free to report that to us, like in the center. Also, I know there's a lot of student leaders here. Y'all already know when you put up posters and things, right? If you see things that don't have stamps, taking them down. So I think it takes community care as well to look out for messages that may come across as like, oh, that might hit different for someone, or that might be offensive. If you're questioning it, just take a picture of it, and especially if it has no stamp, please pull it down. Yeah.
Malia, I would just like to add that I heard in your question reference to the current administration and the current state, the climate that we're in. I just want to remind us that we're a state institution and not a federal institution, and that we still have our mission and vision. And in our vision, in the first line, it says Highline College creates anti-racist, equitable pathways in higher education to close opportunity gaps experienced by our students. So that still remains part of the fabric of who we are as an institution. That's part of like our values. Now, we may come under some kind of duress in our approach as time goes on, but today and for the foreseeable future, that continues to be part of our mission and vision and values of Highline College. So with you as a student leader, with these folks here, we are going to continue to have these conversations and understand when there are impacts So our actions will be spurred by what we say. Those aren't just words on a page, but this should be driving how we exist as a college and how we serve our students in our community.
In the campus cultural, since Billy was asking particularly about whether religion has the same status as race, I think that that phrase didn't necessarily. I think it was talking about anti-racism as a focus because of, but I think like looking at the campus cultural diversity policy, Highline has them on the same status, so that's the intention.
Thank you. This is just a statement, but it's also, before I get started, it's great to know the name to the faces because I'm still fairly new. This is my fourth quarter here. I want to start off like this. So for me, who's still currently in the Army, 16 years, deployed twice, I put my hand to the oath to say, I defend everybody's religions, the rights of freedoms of this country, foreign and domestic. And seeing that group, because I took a few notes to all the things that y'all said, and I understand sometimes it's you see the line, but then the line either get pushed back or close enough that you can do something. But when I hear free speech, I think it's a cliche term to a point. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, I may disagree with you, but there's a thing called going too far. And when I see a picture of dead fetuses and female students saying that you are murderers, that triggers me. That triggers me. And to me, that's not even free speech to me. When you got majority men telling young women, and realize on this campus, you still got impressionable minds. And you won't believe in the military, we got impressionable minds too. And when you say those type of things, it has an effect. Not only just them, but also, like I said, y'all don't know what that line is, but that shows to the college that you allow this to happen. And so what I'm saying is, I would have said the other term, but I'm not gonna say that, but I will say this, is you are the company that you keep. And I understand, people can say what they want and all that and cause debates. But I think in this climate now, it's beyond debate. It's about right and wrong. And what they do, I think those gentlemen were here, but I think they left. But now it's more of, this is right and wrong, what we're talking about here. And like I told the student, because I actually debated these gentlemen. I actually debated them, and one of them actually made up a great point. One thing I learned in the military is situational awareness. So if you probably saw me, I'm looking around and all that stuff. And in civilian terms, you got to read the room. So when you're on campus and you're saying these things, and one of the things that I debated them, that I challenged them on, I said, count the people that you have here. You have 3 men and you got 1 woman talking about this. And she's barely saying anything. You don't see an issue with that? And then when you bring, and heaven forbid for anybody who's a Christian up here or who's religious, you're basing it upon your religion. When majority of this college that I've seen are either Muslims or of a different faith. It's more of a free speech. It's more of you throwing your religion onto them. And I'm happy that you brought up the people handing out Bibles, because I actually had one, a random guy in a suit just hand me a Bible. And I really felt offended because I'm not religious, but I put myself in the shoes of a Muslim, Hinduist, or whoever, and you hand me this. My thing is, you should read the room, knowing who is here and knowing what situation you put in yourself, because not only for them is making them look bad, but also, unfortunately, it puts a dark light on y'all. Because I'm not only just talking from a, I'm going to say soldier, but from a student's lens, I'm also looking at it from y'all lens too as well. Because in the military, I'm a leader, and I have to not only see it from my point of view, I got to see it from my soldier's point of view. And I think, and I'm just offering the solution, I'm not saying that they should not be here, but I do believe that it should be a process where whoever comes on this campus that want to spread a message as they want to should be vetted. They should be researched. It should not be up to the students. It also should be up to the faculties to do their research on these groups, knowing what type of message they're putting out. Now, if these gentlemen decide to come back and clean it up a little bit, I'm cool with that. I'm not that type to try to silence anybody, but it's the delivery and also how you putting out that message to these students that probably, got their first time about to leave their parents' house or got their own car, they get to go wherever they want to. So I just want y'all to just keep that in mind, not only just for y'all, but also for the students too as well. And I'm happy that also you brought up about doing, organizing and all that stuff, because that was one of my key things that I wanted to say. And so I would think that would be better for not only just for students, but for y'all when these groups come up on here to vet them and just to clean it up a bit, because right now it's not even about dialogue no more. It's about right and wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment. I want to give anyone who wants an opportunity to respond, but I do want to highlight that there are ways, another way that, speaking to the broader political climate we're in right now, we in the library worked with folks across campus to build resources, and we built basically an online guide with lots of resources called Highline Supports Its Communities, or Supports Our Communities, and it's particularly focused on vulnerable and marginalized communities on campus right now, particularly immigrant and refugee communities, undocumented students, LGBTQ IA plus students, and identifying folks. So we want to try to build resources to try to change that culture. But I think the other thing that you're talking about that is an interesting, specific proposal is the idea that we have, and I know, and David, I don't want to put you on the spot here because I know that you've talked about this, but the idea that we get some information about who these people are to the community. That sounds like the specific proposal there. So I'm just wondering, David, if you could speak to that, what that maybe the trade-offs with that or that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, thank you for your comment first. And unfortunately, public safety has to keep a very neutral stance when we have visitors on campus, just because there is two opposing opinions, and our job is to maintain the safety of everybody involved. Some of the stuff you said, you're not wrong. I wish I could do more about it. And one of the first things that I don't know if you were here, but I did mention the two things that are protected under the First Amendment is offensive and immoral. So you say right or wrong, and that really does fall under the immoral category. And while I don't necessarily disagree with you, there's, they do have some protections under the First Amendment. As for vetting people that come on campus, when I first talked about people coming to campus, I did mention that we encourage people to let us know they're coming. We can't hold them to that. There's nothing that says I can kick them off because they didn't. But when they do, we do go check their websites and kind of find out who our guests are, because I know Shon mentioned it before with the Westboro Baptist Church, and if they came, I definitely want to know who are they, what's their intentions, and the violence that normally surrounds them. So we do normally look into groups that come and just try to find out who they are, Yes, we know that their message is probably not gonna be accepted and, might offend people, but we just make sure that it's not gonna bring violence as well. So that's mostly what we're looking for. Unfortunately, we don't have a vetting system where we get to say, sorry, I don't like your message, nope. And again, I don't get to say, no, people are not gonna like your message, you need to go to this corner of the campus and where hopefully people don't see you. I'm not even allowed to send out a message saying, this is gonna be right here, if you don't wanna see it, walk around it, because people have been sued for censorship even with those type of emails. So we have to keep a very neutral stance, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think we should all acknowledge David's in a particularly difficult situation with regard to the laws that govern this. I've heard him say that as a human being, this is hard to see, but in his role. So we appreciate you, David, in your sort of having to find yourself between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. We are at 1:30, so I think we will wrap it up. Before you leave, please take a moment to scan one of these codes here, and it's a very short survey. It's one multiple choice question and one feedback question where you can give us some feedback. I'm gonna be the one who reads that and I can share it, but I genuinely want to hear everyone's feedback and to understand what else you want to know about. As I said, I'm hoping to build a resource that people can go read online, including having the video of this forum displayed there. We can continue these conversations in in this kind of forum potentially, or other forums. So we really welcome your feedback. Thank you all. And again, any last comments from the panelists as well?
One, just because it touches so much on the mission of the bias incidence response team. My angle in this is, I'm not sure we can promise to do everything that we should, honestly, because we're in a context with courts and stuff. However, we do. That doesn't mean that, students shouldn't push, students should push, and we do have a lot of people who are trying, all of us are trying to do what we can. The more reports we have, the more that shows that there's a pattern, and that helps us make an argument that there should be a shift. And so, for example, if there's a takeaway, the school's providing resources for you to speak out, and also we have resources and we form them for saying when there's a problem and something shouldn't be okay. I hope it comes across like the institution itself is in a kind of weird spot where we might not be able to do everything we kind of wish we could, but also if there's reporting and taking advantage of the stuff that is there, that at least it's a struggle, and that at least will push it towards the way it should go. So I can't make promises on behalf of BIRT, but we can definitely, that's what we're there for. And the more that we hear about it, and the more that students come to us, and the more that it's raised as a concern on campus, the more we can say, well, yeah.
And again, thank y'all for staying even during the extra time. Thank you for sharing your comments and receiving all of that. We're receiving everything that students have said, true to heart. And I know, thank you for the accountability, because it does suck to say, when we feel like we can't be helpful in more ways, right? And wanting to show up for you in more ways that will allow us. But I do want to offer, again, CCIE and CLS, we're keeping track and we're noticing what we see on campus. So I do want to offer, and this has always been a programming that I wanted to do, but when we talk about interfaith dialogue and wanting to reaffirm students in their identities. So I also want to say, if you have topic ideas, I see some club leaders in the space as well, or if you want to collaborate with our department, please come let us know. We want to hear your ideas. We want to be sure to reaffirm you as we're planning for future programming. That's what our center is here to provide. So not only, you don't have to get involved. If you just want to come and drop an idea, we will take that in our planning team, in our organizing, or if you need some support and want to learn more about how students can organize, please connect with us post today's conversation. So thank you.
Thank you again. Have a good day.